is going to be about rethinking teaching methods. So it's the last webinar of the Elan Student Fair, last but not least. So I'm going to start with a short introduction in French and English, and then I will give the floor to our presentators. Bonjour à tous, bienvenue au dernier webinaire du salon virtuel Elan. C'est notre 6e webinaire de la journée, donc merci d'être avec nous. Ce webinaire portera sur les nouvelles techniques pédagogiques, nouvelles approches pédagogiques. Alors, nous avons aujourd'hui comme panéliste avec nous Madame Stacy Denis, qui travaille au Centre pour la langue anglaise à l'Université des West Indies. Et nous avons Madame Marie-Françoise Cinceau, qui est la vice-dean, je ne sais plus comment on dit ça en français, de l'Académie de Martinique. So I'm going to present our speakers now in English. We have with us Mrs. Stacy Denis. Thank you much, the officer in charge of the Center of English Language Learning at the University of West Indies. And we have Mrs. Marie-Françoise Bernard Cinceau, the Vice Dean of the Ministry of Education in Martinique. So I'm going to give the floor to Stacy first for her presentation. Here we go.
Okay, thank you so much. And just let me say good evening from beautiful but rainy Barbados. Yes, today's a very rainy day. So I want to say that it's a real privilege to have been asked to present this webinar. And I wish to say thank you, first of all, to Elan. I am passionate. I think anybody who knows me knows that I'm very passionate about language teaching and language learning. And I hope that that comes across in the presentation and that you would have benefited in some small measure by having been here. Let me start by saying, though, that I find it interesting that as language teachers, we're always seeking that best method or approach to language teaching. And so the most asked question tends to be, what is the best way to teach language? But I want to say that I think that we're asking the wrong question first. I actually think we're asking the wrong question. The real question is, why do we even need a different approach to language teaching and assessment than what we currently have? I think once we start to address the problem or examine the problem from that angle, we start to focus on the source of the problem as opposed to the symptoms. And I'm going to explain it in a way that I think that we're all too familiar with these days. Imagine that you go to a hospital today and you say that you're complaining of fevers, chills, vomiting, headaches. The doctor will likely say, okay, you have COVID-19 and I'm sending you to an ICU ward. But if you can imagine that on that ward, you have a very observant nurse who notices a raised bump and perhaps a small rash, signaling that you might have been bitten by a mosquito and likely you have dengue. So one of two things, or both things might be happening here, which we could compare to the language teaching situation that we're currently facing. Either you're being treated for a problem that you don't have, or the doctor is disregarding the problem that you do have. And that's a lot like what is happening today in the language teaching field. I feel that our interventions or methods or approaches to teaching and assessment, things like the community language learning approach, the communicative approach, formal high-stakes testing that rank, file, and label students, these are all ignoring the problems that we do have. Problems like students not engaging with language lessons, teachers not consistently implementing what they learn on their training courses. But as my topic suggests, I'm going to let the people who are most affected by all of this speak. I'm going to let the students have their say. And what I want is that as you watch this video, I'm trying to go to slide 2. Okay, thank you.
Do you want me to? Sorry.
No, it's okay. I want that as you watch and listen to this video, I want you to empathize in a way that moves you to start asking the right kinds of questions, so that we're not reading teaching methods, but we're thinking teaching methods. They don't need to be new, they just need to be humane. Okay? And this is what's going to give us the right kind of relevant action towards the kinds of answers that we need today. So I'm going to ask you, Clara, to play the video and to stop at 4 minutes and 7 seconds for me, please. Thank you.
What is school for? Feel free to call me slow, but I spent 16 years going to school, and I still don't know. When I finished, I didn't know how to do my own taxes, purchase a home, or apply for a loan. I didn't know a thing about investments, building credit, or getting a job. I graduated at the top of my class, and what did I have? This fancy diploma to sit at home with my mom. But luckily, they did teach me some important skills like factoring trinomials and how mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. I'm so happy I remember the Pythagorean theorem, because it helped me a lot. Okay, I'm lying. Let me stop. Because all the stuff they taught me, truthfully, I forgot. Mom, remember when you would ask me, what did you learn in school today? And I would say, nothing much. I wasn't being modest. The truth about it, Mom, is I had already forgotten. And it's not just me. Millions of students sing the same song. How many of you guys avoid eye contact with the teacher to try not to get caught upon? Afraid to raise your hand for fear of being wrong, which proves that school isn't an environment for learning or building up the intellect. It's just a game you play for grades and how many A's you can collect. But I guess what do you expect when the most commonly asked question in class is this gonna be on the test? Is this gonna be on the test? See, if school put learning instead of testing and memorizing as the top standard, then the letter F would not stand for failure. It would stand for find another answer. And if school was really interested in our personal and academic success, students would wake up later, have more freedom, and homework a lot less. And that's not my opinion. This conclusion has been scientifically tested and proven. And any teacher that doesn't believe me, feel free to check my works cited page to inspect. Oh, and I did it in MLA format because I know that's all you will accept. See, students would get more benefit from an extra hour of sleep than putting them through the torture of an extra essay, reading 150 pages, doing problems 1 through 60 on the worksheet, and having 3 projects due by the end of the week. Not only is it pointless pain, but it's also dim-witted, because we get so much work, but they don't teach the time management skills to deal with it. See, in school, we are controlled by bells. We have to learn in rooms with the feng shui of a prison cell. We have to ask permission to relieve bodily functions, but not before the teacher asks a million questions like, why didn't you go before class? I'm sorry, my bladder is kind of on its own schedule and it's not always timely. See, teachers always say, use your time wisely. But that never made sense to me. Because these 6 cruel hours of our lives we call school might literally be the worst use of time management ever in history. Think about it, the traditional teaching method is foolish. No, it's useless, multiplied by the square root of stupid. What they do is they cram information in your head, force feeding you, and then you throw it up on the test. That's not education, that's bulimia. And the more bulimic you are, the better you will do on their assessments. So it's no wonder why so many students graduate mentally and emotionally anorexic. See, school teaches you how to memorize dots. True education should teach you how to connect them. True education teaches you how to catch a fish. School teaches you, yeah, you caught the fish, but you didn't show your work, so it doesn't count. Throw it back. I'm just asking, what is school for? It's not education, that's just not true. If you still think that, you might be sniffing glue. See, the word education comes from the Latin root educe, meaning bring out, i.e. bring the gifts out of a person and make them viable. But school doesn't bring out much, it just stuffs more facts inside of you. Now some of that stuff is justifiable.
Thank you.
Read, reading, writing, and some of...
Thanks very much, Clara. So I'll just have the presentation back.
Yeah, thank you very much for this inspiring video. I can see that it has a lot of success in the chat.
Okay, thanks very much. So what is the point that I'm trying to get at? The point is that our approach to language teaching cannot be a one-size-fits-all. It has to address the question of what is a language education for. It also has to address and consider the cultural, the linguistic, and the learning diversities of our students, which should lead us then into looking into approaches like the biography-driven approach. Let me just put this up here for you. We should be looking at concepts like culturally responsive teaching, experiential learning. When I think of the biography-driven instruction approach, which we tend to use a lot in my center, I'm talking about a culturally responsive pedagogy. It draws on methods like culturally responsive teaching, input hypothesis, zone of proximal development. I'm trying to remember them all. Integrated instruction. But the point is that any approach that we consider in language teaching must incorporate various methods. There is no one right method. And I hope that we're getting that. There is no one right method. Any approach must respond to these four areas. The socio-cultural, what brings students to life? What brings them to laughter? What brings them to love? The linguistic, how do students use their L1 and their L2, not just for comprehension and communication, but for expression? The cognitive, how do students know? How do they think? How do they apply? And obviously the academic, to what degree do students have access? To what degree do they have engagement? And for me, most importantly, to what degree do they have hope that what they're learning will make a difference in their lives? So through this presentation, I'm challenging all teachers to answer these questions in their own cultural context and through their own construction of their own teaching approaches, whether they're doing it as individuals, as peers, or as working teams. And when you start studying other approaches to language teaching, I want that you not adopt them wholesale. I want that you adapt them to fit your current cultural context and the circumstances. Unfortunately, in the Caribbean, we tend to be a buy-into society. So we tend to buy things wholesale and push them into the context wholesale without looking at how they fit our environments, how they fit our context, how they fit our circumstances. And I just want to say one thing here quickly about assessment. As language teachers, as language educators, we need to be evaluating multiliteracies. And we cannot evaluate multiliteracies through a single literacy like writing. Nor can we do that by a single homogeneous high stakes test. The idea of 1 year's work, 1 year information crammed into a 2-hour exam is insane. It is insane, and we're supposed to be intelligent people. What we need are progressive, continuous, authentic assessments where we teach not to test, but to progress our students along a learning continuum or around a learning spectrum. But whatever it is that we do, the conclusion has to be that the best approaches to language teaching must consider the interests of students. It must consider their knowledge, their skills, their attitudes, and it must consider how we're going to help them develop personally alongside societal needs. And this is alongside those needs beyond the economic. Societies are not just economies. We need to get past that in order to find the best kind of approaches, not approach, but approaches to language learning and language teaching. And once we can do all of this, once we can integrate all of these things together, we have the best approaches to language learning and language teaching, because they're going to be the most humane approaches. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Stacey, for your very insightful presentation. I think it really resonated in a lot of us, especially when we think about our curriculum and all those times when we thought, oh man, why am I learning that? What I'm going to do with that? It's not going to prepare me for the real life. Something that I wanted to discuss with you when you're talking about best approaches, I was wondering if maybe you had examples, teaching methods, techniques that are concretely usable to have a better approach at that, and also, yeah.
Okay, so I want to make it very clear that the best approach is an approach that is learner-centered. There is no best method. People are trying to sell books, textbooks. People are trying to sell techniques, and we need to understand that language teaching and language learning is an economic game as well. We need to understand that. But as teachers, especially if we're humanists, I'm coming from a very humanist perspective here. The best approach that we can offer our students is one where we get to know them, where we understand our societal needs, where we understand our history. I think that's very important, something that we tend to lack, understanding our history, the history of language teaching in this part of the world, and asking ourselves, what was education for? Is education, or the needs of education, the same today? Once we understand that they are not, then we will understand what the best approaches are, because the best approaches are going to come from us, the teachers. They're not going to come from some book from somewhere in North America or Europe. In the Caribbean, we understand our context better than anybody else does. And it's the approach lined up or aligned with the context that will be the best approach. The other thing that I want to say is that a method and an approach, if we are language teachers, we understand that they're not the same. An approach, we can use anything that will motivate language learning, anything that will encourage language learning. A method tends to be a lot more concrete and discrete. Okay, so this is why I say that no one method will work, because within any approach, there should be several different methods. As long as we have the student's interest in the center of our teaching, the right approach will come. Teachers have enough knowledge, they have enough experience, they have enough skills. If they have the right attitude, they will find the best methods and the best approaches. It comes from within. I hope that that's clear.
that was very clear. Thank you very much. If I may have another question for you as a teacher, well, when we're thinking about individual approaches, individual technique methods, my question is always, okay, as a teacher, when you have a class in front of you, how do you do it to assess each learner's needs? They're not they're not going to be the same from one learner to another. How do you deal with that? Because it must be very time consuming for you. So I was wondering how this can be done.
Yes. So part of the problem is the kinds of assessment that we are submitting. First of all, we're teaching to a curriculum. And if we're teaching to a curriculum, it means that we have to assess in the way that that curriculum will allow us to. That is the major problem. If we are doing what I call progressive, not formative, progressive, authentic assessment, then we get to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of the students. And we're not going to foreground the weaknesses just to try to build them up. We're also going to look at students' strengths, because we need those strengths. We need those strengths to help pull the weaknesses along, if you're understanding what I'm saying. In other words, we need to know what the students already know to help them to understand the things that they don't know. And this is why I gave the analogy of the COVID, because I think that we can all relate to that now. But I could have simply used a lot of terminology that people did not understand. So what we're doing is that we're using the knowledge with which the student presents in the classroom to help the student to understand the things that he or she needs to know. What we are assessing isn't whether or not the student has, acquired grammar at 100%. What we are assessing is whether the student understands what he or she has learned to the degree that he or she can apply it. Application, not to a test, but to real life. That's why it needs to be authentic. So, for example, I've learned Spanish for how many years? I don't want to say. I might be giving my age away. But at the end of the day, when I am faced with a native speaker of Spanish, I'm in trouble. I'm in serious trouble. I have to say, más despacio, por favor. More slowly, please. More slowly, please. That doesn't make for good conversation. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's because I was taught, to be tested for a curriculum. So once we get to know the students in the class, and we're not so focused on the testing aspect, we get to understand what the students do know, what they don't know. We get to assess their strengths and their weaknesses. And we learn how to build on those weaknesses, right? So for example, I don't believe people talk about learning styles. This student has this learning style or that learning style. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. I believe in learning strategies. We're going to give them strategies so that whatever they need to learn, whatever the best way to learn it is, they're going to use those strategies to help them to learn the information. If we say that they have a specific learning style, it means that, oh, we have to teach those students who are visual in a visual way. But we can't always teach in a visual way. There are times they're going to need to hear, there are times they're going to need to write, there are times that they're going to need to do other things. What we're actually doing when we disregard learning styles is that we give them more types of skills, more types of strategies to help them to learn better.
Thank you very much.
That's my little ramble.
I can totally rely on your experience with the Spanish, because I had exactly the same experience. I learned Spanish for years and years in the classroom, and only the day when I had roommates that were Spanish, or when I traveled to Spanish-speaking countries, I finally learned the language for real. But yeah.
Exactly. Exactamente.
Well, Thank you very much, Stacey, for your presentation. I don't know if you want to add anything, any other comments. We will have time at the end if you want to.
No, I'll give the floor to Marie-Françoise.
Okay, before giving the floor to you, Marie-Françoise, I wanted to have a little word because at the beginning, this webinar was supposed to be held with 3 panelists. Unfortunately, Mr. Raffer Gordon, who was supposed to be with us, was not able to join us because of computer technical issues. Last minute, this is what happens with live conferences as well. So he wanted to apologize for that. And yeah, we will try to make his presentation available because it was really interesting as well. It was about new pedagogical approaches as well, about knowledge transmission and assessment methods as well. So yeah, we'll try to upload it somewhere, somehow, so it will be available for you guys. Okay, now we're gonna have Marie-Françoise talking about French perspective on student assessment and reform of vocational education. So I'm gonna put her presentation and give the floor to you, Marie-Françoise.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's okay? Yeah. So good evening to everyone. I'm grateful for this invitation to contribute to the progress of education and training in the Caribbean. As the Deputy Dean of the Board of Inspectors in charge of vocational education, and as more specifically as a language teaching inspector monitoring English teachers in technical education units, under responsibility of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports, and subsequently to the Rector of the High Commissioner in charge of education in the Academy region of Martinique. My task today is to share with you about teaching methods and new approaches to knowledge transmission and student assessment in the context of the current transformation of vocational education. So since 2005, in France, vocational bodies, trainers and teachers have been thinking and rethinking their methods of teaching and evaluating students to meet with European requirements. Lately, in 2017, a Secretary of State was appointed at the head of the Department for Youth, Non-Formal Education and Voluntary Organization. So what motivated the creation of this new department? In 2016, according to Eurostat, youth unemployment rate for under 25 years old has reached 26.2%, and precarity affected more and more young people in France. Continued inequalities between young people led to the fragmentation of French society. This was the government's and local authorities' major concern, and a challenge was to be taken to take it into account in youth policies. So the French educational model since the 1950s has been characterized by ongoing spread of mass education and has undergone many changes in the last decade to meet with these challenges. However, academic success is very much related to family socio-economic condition. International assessments reveal that French school children are within the average in terms of success rate. France is one of the OECD countries where academic inequalities between school children are the most significant. In addition, although lifelong learning has been integrated in the labor code, there still are major inequalities in access to training. So I'm going to give you a view of what vocational education is in France. So first, I will talk about the vocational education in France. I'll tell about the reason why we have been under a reforming process. Then I will tell about assessment practice and teaching methods in vocational schools, and then give you a little light about my reflection on assessment. So to tell you about vocational education in France, if you are 15 years old and you have no doubt about what you want to do in the future, you know which job you are going to do, or if you have a job and you are older and you have a job, you don't want to, you want to shift and start a new career, you can apply for a vocational degree and subscribe to a vocational high school. So national education so let me tell you about national education in sorry. Yes, this is to show to the English people around us how school is organized in the French system. So as you can see, on top of, you have at the bottom nursery schools, and then middle school, primary school, middle school, and then here you can see the vocational school, and you can easily observe that there is balance between vocational high school and technical and general high school. So if this is so perfect, why reforming? The reform of vocational school became effective in September 2019. And let's see, in Martinique, we have about 16 vocational schools and high schools and some other private units. So despite an important network of partners and educational savoir-faire, vocational education suffers from a lack of attractiveness, mostly due to a lack of consideration for vocational training routes, as well as a lack of connection to the social environment, leading to low rates of youth employability. So the Ministry of Education launched a revolutionary scheme called Transformation, so to transform vocational education and training, aiming at increasing attractiveness, adapting curricula to the new technological and environmental constraints, improving employability, matching job skills requirements with adult training schemes. So the main measures adopted were turning job qualification campuses into campuses of excellence, adapting training programs, developing apprenticeship and mobility, emphasizing competence-based education. First, I will focus on job and qualification campuses. They are networks opening up vocational education schools to higher education institutions, research facilities, as well as local economic activities. The goal is to turn these campuses into campus of excellence with cultural and sports infrastructures, boarding school, secondary and higher education institutions that offer vocational training from the lower certification to the higher degree, even PhD. Technical and research centers will be added to this network, apprenticeship scheme centers, partner companies, business factories, fab labs, business incubators, and a network of training institutions. These campuses contribute to local economic development. So by fostering youth professional insertion, access to higher education, encouraging the return to school to dropout students. They also help developing information to students and parents, especially about international mobility and developing cultural education. Up to 2022, the state and regional authorities will contribute to the development of these campuses in order to have at least 3 of them in each region. As for Martinique, the 3 campuses in the making are the Blue Economy Campus, Hospitality and Catering Services, Health, Daycare and Safety is the last one. The second measure in the transformation of vocational education is the adaptation of training programs to students and local territory needs. In 2018, the Ministry of National Education and the social partners made vocational education training programs coincide with present-day requirements and future needs. 2 main axes were chosen. So they developed programs that allow young people to enter the labor market right after graduation in sectors where companies lack skilled force, and second, in new sectors which are significantly being developed and will require a workforce with a relevant skill set in the near future. They also have worked on programs that do not allow young graduates to find a job. Those programs have been rewritten. So sometimes it's because they are related to declining sectors, or because the training programs did not match with the company's needs. So the third measure in the transformation of vocational education is the development of apprenticeship, international mobility, and student assessment. Because of a double target of boosting transition into the labor market and helping dropouts back into training, apprenticeship programs are being developed in every vocational school as apprenticeship units. The chances of getting a job opportunity are now diverse. And in the degrees, a facultative mobility unit was created in 2014 as an experiment to estimate students' knowledge and skills after a mobility scheme abroad in Europe. The assessment is based on both continuous testing during the academic year and a score during the training period abroad. It was a successful experiment, so the test is now introduced into all the degrees, and it's now possible to sit for this mobility unit if in other territories outside Europe. So ELAN is the right program for this mobility unit. So the transformation of vocational school has modified the main degrees which allow to enter the labor market. So 2 main degrees, so I try to find the equivalent in English. So a basic proficiency in a professional field, a kind of national vocational qualification level 1, 2, is called CAP. And the second one is the vocational baccalaureate. This is an advanced national vocational qualification level 3. So they are the main 2 routes in vocational education and have been reformed to become effective in 2019. The first renovated exams will be held in 2022. So the process to training starts earlier. So 8th graders in middle schools are submitted to observation internship with their parents' consent. An online internship bank is being set up to provide students in all different types of vocational training programs with workplaces or workplace opportunities according to professional sectors, from basic qualification to post-graduation. So one of the most important change is in the transformation of the vocational field is emphasizing competency-based education and competence-based degrees. So the basic national vocational qualification CAP can be completed in 1 year for students with good general performance, or for persons who have, for a person who has already got a degree, or a student from another field in technological vocational schools. It can be done in 2 years for most cases, or in 3 years for special needs students. The core competency reference guides and the list of skills for vocational training schemes were reviewed to adjust to future needs. General courses were reviewed to make them more adequate. A positioning test is set up to identify mathematics and French language needs for new students entering the qualification process. Soft skills or savoir-être, transmission of cultural social codes, as well as professional attitudes were added. So, and finally, the number of apprenticeship schemes will be increased, and it will be possible to get a double degree. As for the vocational baccalaureate, I leave this slide because I wanted the English who can understand the word competence in French, because it is transparent words, to see that in every step we can read the word competence here, acquisition of competencies or special competencies. So at every step, the question of acquiring competence is the key word. So I forgot to say that the students have to go through positioning tests in French and mathematics, and will spend 4 to 6 weeks in a company, and then choose a specialty for the 2nd and 3rd year. During the 2nd year, the students will enlarge their knowledge and skills and spend an increasing time for 6 to 8 weeks in a company, and then will start working on their masterpiece project. During the 3rd year, the students will spend 8 weeks in a company and choose between 2 modules, either support for higher education or preparing for an occupation or entrepreneurship. The students end their last academic year by presenting their masterpiece, which can be an individual or a group project. They present it in front of a jury, and they sit for a final exam. So for 60% of their score, The remaining 40% has been gained through ongoing testing during the year. So co-teaching, co-learning, and experiments are encouraged. Continuous evaluation is simplified. Positioning tests in general and technical units are set up at the end of year 2. Students who get at least 10 out of 20 will receive an intermediate certificate to encourage their work and their engagement. In fact, for each vocational degree, students who fail will be given a certificate, like the lifelong training reports for adults, mentioning the domains where they have reached at least 10 out of 20. These evolutions come with a renewed training plan for teachers in vocational education. This leads us to the third part of the presentation, assessment practice and teaching methods. So what is the impact of those changes on teachers' training and practices? How do we deal with the concept of competency-based learning? I mean, a learner-centric practice which offers each learner the opportunity to develop skills and acquire knowledge at his pace, at his own pace. It is the ideal tool for vocational education, which gathers most low performers with impairments and special needs students. Apart from being learner-centric, the concept of competency-based learning is outcome-based. It always starts with clearly defining the learning outcomes. It is adapted, differentiated. It offers different paths and routes to success. Competency-based education differs from other approaches in that the unit of learning is extremely fine-grained. Rather than a course or a module, every individual skill or learning outcome, known as a competency, is one single unit. Learners work on one competency at a time, which is a small component of a larger learning goal. The students is assessed or evaluated on the individual competency, is tested on one individual competency, and can only move on to other competencies after they have mastered the current skill being learned. If the learner can demonstrate mastery, he can skip learning modules entirely. This can be made clear through prior learning assessment. It all goes with a set of different tools, national positioning tests. I think I did the wrong. Assessment cards, students' portfolios, and reports. Now, digital records from primary school to the end of compulsory education are available. So, to get the competence-based degree at NVQ level 1, 2, and 3, or BTEC, BTS, the students go through an ongoing sequence of particular interactions that are systematically designed to approach performance standards. So a new portfolio has just been issued in July 2020. It's a livret scolaire du lycée professionnel, a record of competencies, a portfolio with training periods reports, and a 3 years records of competencies used by exam juries on D-Day. So these are all the different tools I mentioned a second ago. So sorry, it's not my score. So I'm going to tell you about my not my film, but what I found about the way teachers reacted to assessment in vocational schools in the last decades. Assessment in education is the product of the 20th century. So the last 2009 vocational school reform had introduced many changes, and teachers were taught that assessment is a systematic process for gathering data about students' achievement, an essential component of teaching. They have learned that the impact of assessment is significantly observable on students' performance. They had learned that the way students approach learning determines the way they think about classroom assignments and tests. They had learned that including students in the process of developing assessment tools was necessary, and that students should be held responsible for their learning. So they also learned about theories or techniques by Michael Scriven, who proposed to use formative and summative assessments. They learned about the role of evaluation as informative to improve instruction and summative to measure students' achievement. So the use of assessment to classify, predict, and sort has also changed to advance the process of teaching and learning, in addition to accountability purposes, according to Gordon. So because assessment significantly affects students' approach to learning, assessment paradigms have shifted from testing learning of students to assessing for students' learning. This is a quotation by Birnbaum. So now I turn to the last, the last report by a board of Inspector General produced in October 2020, is recently. So according to these inspectors, who reveal a rather accurate picture of the evolution of assessment practices since the introduction of the European Qualification Framework in 2012. This European Qualification Framework is a translation device to make national qualification more readable across Europe, promoting workers' and learners' mobility and facilitating their lifelong learning. So here is the gist of the Inspectors General observation. They chose a three-scope presentation. So assessment as a challenge for both teachers and students, positioning and measuring performance, the choice of indicators, timing and frequency, and organization of continuous monitoring. So in the first part of the report, they insist on the fact that the question of assessment is a very complex one due to the multi-partnership that it entails. Students, teachers, parents, school authorities, national and international bodies are involved in the same process. Assessment data have a prominent role in the management of schools and education units. So collecting data is getting so time-consuming that it greatly impacts teachers and directors' lives. So from a status of measurement tool in the quest for student progress, at the start, assessment has become...
Marie-Françoise, sorry for interrupting you. I see the time is running very fast and that Stacey needs to go 6 sharp.
Okay,
so we can wrap up quickly. We can have a little...
Yes.
I let you finish. I'm sorry
Okay.
for.
Okay. I almost finished. I've
Okay.
almost finished. Yes. Sorry. So, in a world where competency and knowledge transmission are not brought only by school alone, but by the use of new technologies and digital tools outside school, social media, the internet, family circle, NGOs bring more to students than they used to. A major competency school has to develop is the sense of truth and the art of fact-checking. So it is urgent to join together, as we are doing today, to share knowledge about training, educating, and assessing, and evaluate this endeavor. I mean, we must give every human being the means of developing his skills so as to earn a proper, basic, healthy living and provide him or her with ethical values to guarantee that he or she will do the same with every being on earth and beyond. So I will finish my presentation by doing what every student or every teacher does currently in our vocational school. When we finish, we try to make a self assessment.
Assessment.
So thank you very much and ready for your questions.
Thank you very much, Marie-Françoise, for your very complete and informative presentation. Stacy, before you have to run, first of all, if the audience have any question, you still have time to ask them in the chat. And I wanted to ask you too something is, so we had the conversation about vocational training, about assessments, and I thought about also students, high school students' experience, and I wanted to ask you if you had any advices for, because we have many an audience who are also high school students who are going to look at what they want to do after that. And would you have any advices for those who are a bit lost, a bit confused about what they want to do after high school? And because we all had this moment in our lives when we were asking ourselves, oh my God, what am I going to do after high school? Do you have any advices for them?
My advice would not be to the students. My advice would be to the education system. We really, you know, I sat down and I listened to Mary and I thought, you know, she asked the question, why reform if everything seems to be so perfect? You know, and I'm thinking that yearly or by every 2 years or so, we have these educational reform, but we're still seeing the same kinds of outcomes. And it reminds me of the saying, nothing changes if nothing changes. So I'm listening to Marie-Françoise and I'm thinking, this sounds really good, the apprenticeship in every school. This sounds really good. But what is at the back of it all? That we're assessing in the same way.
Yeah.
Formative assessment. That is problematic. That is problematic. At 14, 15 years old, a child shouldn't decide what he or she wants to do with his or her life at 14 or 15. Come on. What I would advise the students to do, you don't want to know what I would advise them to do.
Take time.
Boycott school. No. But seriously, we really need to, I think the idea of vocationalizing, I'm a linguist, so I can make up words, of vocationalizing school is important. I think school has been too academic for too long, and therefore it has really only helped or assisted those students who are academically inclined. So I think it's important that the vocational aspect, even for the academic leaning students, I think that's important, but it's the assessment. that is problematic. We have to look at the assessment once again. And something else that we need to look at the philosophies and ideologies on which our educational system is built. Because an educational system that says that we must categorize students as very bright, not so bright, in between, as vocational and as academic, is problematic. You see? So to the students, just do the best you can until, you know, we can do better.
So what I would advise, it's me, it's my turn?
Yes, go ahead, Marika.
So what I would advise a student is take a leap year and do join a volunteer organization, spend a year abroad in a very different environment, and you will find your way. So I think the best thing to do is just have a gap year.
Don't feel like you have to make such a crucial decision at 15 or 16 years old. There are 20-something-year-olds, there are 40-something-year-olds who don't seem to know what they want to do with their life. So understand that at different points in your life, you will have questions and you will have doubts, but just keep plodding on. That's the important thing.
As a volunteer in the Elan program, I couldn't agree more with you, Marie-Françoise. Okay, I thank you very much, both of you, for your great presentation. I am very happy that we were able to close this student fair with you two and with your presentations. I think it's a great way to end it and to put an emphasis on vocational training, which is also very important. So thank you both very much. And this student fair is now going to be closed after 2 days of adventures for us. So thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.